Shalom everyone, this is Nakaraya again. Today we're going to be examining self-esteem as a concept and its existence, and this is going to be the second part to the two-parter series that I have on abuse, with this one of course being self-esteem, particularly low self-esteem. So, as we've done within the first episode, we're going to establish the active definition of low self-esteem, which is a negative perception of oneself characterized by feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and a lack of confidence in one's abilities or work. So, the last part of that is going to be really, really important, because we discussed last episode that the main outlets of the healing process which takes place in the realm of abuse is going to be that of the spirit, the mind, and the body. And so the same thing is going to apply for self-esteem, since self-esteem is something that typically is a result of some sort of abuse, whether that is self-inflicted or otherwise. And so, with that being said, self-esteem is going to link to those three constructs, the body, the soul or spirit, and the mind, in a way that is mainly geared towards competence. So, if we read the definition again, a negative perception of oneself characterized by feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and a lack of confidence in one's abilities. Now, there's this saying that I used to say when I was in my sales career, that confidence exudes competence, and competence breeds confidence. And this is especially true in regards to self-esteem, because it's very, very difficult to feel inadequate if you know that you are in a position to potentially be authoritative in whatever realm you exude that competence within. So, what does that look like for the three facets of the healing process? Well, we have the mind. So perhaps you feel, because of your abuse, self-inflicted or otherwise, you think that you have an inadequate thinking capability. So perhaps what you're going to do to combat that is, one, you'll probably convince yourself that the whole damn thing is a lie, right? Because there's a very slim chance that you're actually mentally inadequate, right? That's a pretty... Minds don't really work like that. There's spectrums of intelligence, of course, but even that doesn't really narrow down the quality of mind that you truly have. It's just an IQ range that is a label that marks your ability to function within society. But that's not something that you can rely on in terms of establishing the quality of mind that you do have, right? So no, chances are it's a lie, that you are not capable of having quality of mind and thought, right? But perhaps you think that what I just said is bogus and you just want to prove yourself even more to yourself, which is a very good idea. So what you might do is read a little bit more, right? You'll read a little bit more, listen to lectures, listen to interviews, ask yourself or find some philosophical questions that you've probably never asked yourself, and ask yourself, and come up with answers. Come up with honest answers that resemble that resemble your own experiences and your own capability to think. And once you develop competence in thoughts, then perhaps you won't feel as inadequate in mind. Now, that's mind. That's just a very vague example of the mind. And the body is a little more transparent, right? It's like, well, perhaps I'm anorexic or pushing there, or I'm obese or pushing there, and I don't feel good about myself. And now self-doubt is starting to arise in my ability to live longer, for example. So, with that being said, you might want to exercise a little bit more during the week, right? Starting, of course, slow and then gaining more momentum, which would increase the effectiveness and intensity of which you obtain your goals, right? So always starting small. And the beautiful thing about exercise too is, there's a dopaminergic sensory when you exercise, because there's the aspect of the endorphins that you release, of course. And then it's like, well, hell, I accomplished something, right? I did something that was difficult, and I did something that I didn't want to do. And that is especially true with calisthenics. So definitely you would want to exercise. And that's how you would probably heal from feeling inadequate as far as physicality is concerned. So that's an aspect of the healing process for self-esteem as well. And so, and I believe we touched on that last video. And then there's the spirit, which is a lot more convoluted, but you do want to exercise faith. Small faith exercises and gaining patience as well in the process, which is going to be the next video. So, digging more into scripture, digging more into philosophical literature, and analyzing the parts of that is fruitful to be applied to your life, and really think about those things and seek for answers and pray a lot. Pray 3 times a day, fast, etc. Stop using profanity, because that's a very spiritual challenge all in itself. It takes discipline. So those are just some things that can make you feel better as far as self-esteem is concerned, especially the spirit, right? Because when you realize that, when you finally, not that you can fully do this, but when you fully conceptualize the fact that you are made in the image of the Most High, that is a very big, it's a very big difference from just simply being a mere human being of a whole collection of atoms that's effectively useless, right? You're not useless. And if you are useless, that's why you have a low self-esteem, which is why I preach competence. You don't have self-esteem without competence. And so that's basically the next line of reasoning that we're going to follow here. Competence. And then competence, for the best results, you want to exude competence, and you want that to link with whatever purpose that you feel is something to strive for intentionally. So, for example, my wife asked me a question last night. It was our anniversary yesterday. Our first anniversary, actually. And we were just asking each other some philosophical questions. And she asked me, how do I define my purpose? Essentially, that's what the question was. And so my answer was to wage war against the malignant, malevolent, Machiavellian principalities in the demonic realm, which unleash lies, which subsequently leads to foolishness, and to combat that with wisdom and counseling for as many people as I possibly can. So that is my purpose, essentially. And there's a whole bunch of goals that I have, as well as, those things. But those things are also deeply aligned with truth and with love and with pain, which are the realest things to exist within our whole cosmos. So with that being said, I know that it's totally in alignment with what the Most High wants me to do, as it was his idea, as was, the birth of Nakaraya's council. The birth of it, or the catalyst rather, was the existential crisis that I had to undertake. And I had to forego whatever the hell I thought I wanted to do. And I had to listen to what the divine guidance was. And once I listened to that, I felt better. And if I didn't listen to that, and if you don't listen to whatever your purpose is, you're going to become bitter, which is going to make you psychologically unhealthy, and it's going to make you dangerous. And so, if you have... So what am I doing right now? If I know that that's my purpose, what am I actively doing to proceed that purpose with competence? Well, first thing that I did was I read an entire clinical psychology textbook. You know, I'm not even, or I am officially an enrolled student now, but at the time I wasn't even a student. I haven't enrolled, I haven't applied or anything. You know, so I did that so I can get more comfort within the linguistics of the psychological literature. That made me feel very, very good about myself because I did something that I didn't have to do, and I did it for my own educational capabilities to prove it to myself. And so what else did I do? Well, I rearranged my wardrobe as you all see, and I read more just in general. I'm 95% done with the wisdom literature within the biblical anthology. I'm writing a book. Stay tuned. I'm writing a book. I have now applied and enrolled with El Camino for classes to pursue my PhD in clinical psychology, and a number of other things. Made this channel, or rebranded this channel as the Most High instructed me to, and I have a lot of big plans for this channel, and so that's what I'm doing. And so what that does for my psyche is it lets me know intrinsically I have worth because of the things that I'm doing. So the things that I'm doing, because they are worth something, I therefore must be worth something. You know, and you can do literally the exact same thing. And this is especially a powerful thing, a place from someone who went through something like abuse, for example, and low self-esteem. I didn't go through abuse, you know, in my experience. I abuse, you could argue that I abuse myself in certain ways, but not in the traditional sense of abuse as far as physical, sexual, or mental from exterior components, right? So, excuse me, what I suffered from was self-loathment, and I grew from that because of the truth of the Most High, which definitely set me free mentally and spiritually, and in some physical ways as well, which I have no choice but to be eternally grateful to the Most High. And so, but this is especially a powerful concept for those who have gone through abuse, because it's like, well, I've been through a hell of a lot. What does it mean? Because that's what humans are, right? We are vessels that are always in pursuit of meaning. And so if we can't make anything, if we can't make any meaning out of whatever we're analyzing, then we'll either trash it or allow it to fester and make us rot and bitter. You know, so, and that is another reason why there are a lot of nihilistic, hedonistic atheists in the world, because they've gone through a significant amount of pain without the correct dosage of love that is supposed to go with that, you know. And then there's the whole aspect of the novelty in which your suffering can go into because you don't have conceptualization of the Most High. So with that novelty and lack of hierarchical benevolence in the spiritual sense, you literally, it's almost like you are psychologically impaired in the realm of being optimistic, which is a horrible thing to go through, you know. But if you can find a way to seek the Most High and ask him the right questions, and he will answer if you want him to, and if you believe he will answer, and you will find some meaning within the abuse and within all of the pain that you've gone through, and you will find your purpose. I basically did the same thing with my pain outlets and with those around me, and with the skill sets that I've acquired over my 21 years of existence. I realized, okay, well, I have skill sets that can help myself and other persons. Perhaps there's something to that. Perhaps. And then I completely forget about it because I'm me. And then the Most High reminds me of it years later to come. And so, and then in there, I find my purpose. You know? So, again, my main motif is introspection. Look within yourself. You know? So there's that. And I believe, let me see. This is very important. You also need to know what low self-esteem looks like when it's seeping under the radar, right? Because a lot of people, perhaps they haven't identified or resonated with the idea of them actually having low self-esteem. It's just they do things that are evidence that low self-esteem exists within them. So this is what I've written down here. So knowing what low self-esteem looks like when it slips through the radar: dependency, pessimistic self-criticism, and overthinking. Now this is very important. We're going to go down the list here. But dependency. What does dependency mean? Now, what I want to get straight here is because there is a plethora of individuals who are so egotistically prideful in the realm of being independent. It's almost disgusting, right? Because it's like, oh, I'm so independent, I'm self-made, I do this, I do that. And it's like, well, okay, well, you're so independent. It's like, what are you really grateful for? Who are you grateful for? Because in reality, we're all dependent on someone else. And if we're not, which is not the case, then that's got to be a road to instantaneous psychopathy. You have to be a very narcissistic individual to think that you are truly self-made 100% and truly independent, because the Most High created us. So that makes us dependent on the Most High straight up. And then after that, it's like, well, the Most High created us to be social beings. And if we're social beings intrinsically, then that means that we have some reliability on social outlets and constructs. So, with that being said, get the idea that you're independent out of the window, right? Now, that being out of the picture. And I'm not saying that being independent doesn't exist, right? You can be an independent thinker, not outsource your thinking and do things for yourself, right? I'm just making an exaggerative claim to make a very simplistic argument. However, going back to dependency, what you don't want to do is be overly dependent on individuals in a way that makes you a burden. So, the way that you know that this stems from low self-esteem is because really when you're overly dependent on something or someone, it's really because you don't feel that you are competent enough to rely on yourself for that particular situation. And I think that's a really good definition of that, right? Because it's like, we all rely on the Most High because we know that we're inadequate in comparison to Him and His capabilities, because His capabilities are effectively limitless. And since we are limited beings, we are definitely going to depend on Him for pretty much anything and everything in every scenario. And so a baby depends on its parents because it has no clue, right? And humans rely on their jobs for money if they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit. You rely on different things. Then the things that you rely on, there is something that you believe that or know that you lack in a certain thing or in a certain aspect, to where you need this or need to depend on this in order to lift you up or keep you steady. So if you're overly dependent on something or others, especially others, see exactly what you're dependent on them for, right? Because a lot of the times you may have a relationship that's completely toxic, but you rely on them for some sort of emotional stability, and it's harming you because the emotional calm and and peace that you're trying to get from others should be coming from yourself. So since you're outsourcing that, you're emotionally dependent on others, then your emotional factory is basically baseless, which is very dangerous in psychological means. So that's dependency. Pessimistic self-criticism. So if you're always having a sort of pessimistic idea about your own characteristics and personality, and especially your capabilities to do things, that's a good idea that you have low self-esteem. You know. So you have to be very careful what you say that you can't do. I've been trying to teach this to as many people as I possibly can, but when I first really got down the line of self-improvement, one of the first things that I decided to do was to eliminate I can't from my vocabulary. Because the moment that you say I can't, you literally cannot, because you've made a mental blockade from where you are and what you said that you cannot do. That's how powerful the mind is, man. So it's like, don't say what you can't do. You know, say, with training I can do that. Oh, that's gonna be really difficult, but I can do it. There is nothing in the world that someone else can do that I cannot also do. And it's a sort of affirmation that you reiterate to yourself within your conscience, introspectively. And if you do this enough, eventually your mind's going to believe it. Like, okay, I keep on thinking this, it must be real. That's, you know, with all of its nuance, interdynamic, like, complexities, the mind can be that simple as well. Repetition. Repetition always wins. So, overthinking. Overthinking is the biggest one in my opinion. Now, a little bit about overthinking, because I know it can sound a little paradoxical coming from me. You know, I encourage thought. This whole channel is about thought. In this whole channel, I encourage introspection. It's my main motto. Deep thinking. You have to think deeply. You have to think a lot. But never overthink. There's a big difference between doing something a lot and doing something too much. Okay? There's a very, very, very big difference. Quite a big gap, actually. And so, I say this from experience because I used to be an overthinker. And once I realized the harm in overthinking, I immediately decided to change. And so, you may ask, okay, well, what is the difference? How do I know the difference between overthinking and thinking a lot? Well, are you thinking a lot about things that you can't control? Are you thinking a lot about things that you can't control? If you are, then you're overthinking. What is the fruit in thinking about something that you literally cannot change in any sort of fashion, within any stretch of the imagination? There's no fruit in it. I'm currently going through a tough season because, as I always say, there's no trouble like car trouble. And I've been going through it as calmly as I possibly could, and that is only the one aspect to the number of things that's happened in the past week. Been actually going through it this week. But what do? I try to hold my head up high, and that's the thing, try, right? Because you're not going to succeed all the time. It's how we are. But you can bloody well try, and you can try very hard. So I try to keep my head up. I remain calm no matter what happens, one of the facets of stoicism. And one of the facets of stoicism as well is to not worry about what you can't control. That's Marcus Aurelius 101. Because there's no logical sense in it. And so I'm in a certain position right now where it's like, oh, well, my car is in a bloody catastrophe. It's my fault, so self-responsibility. Because if you're taking responsibility, then that's also you having a level of competence and higher standard to yourself, which doesn't make you a victim, which is a very nasty word. Okay, so don't be a victim, because a victim is at the very lowest point of the scale in any fashion, right? And so now this is not to say that there is no such thing as a victim, and there are negative connotations associated with, well, there are, but there's nothing really shameful, I'm saying, about being a victim. I'm saying if your goal is to elevate your self-esteem, then you can no longer view yourself as a victim. Especially if you're a man. You know this intrinsically as a man. You cannot be a victim. You have to be capable, you have to be dangerous, you have to be capable of violence and thinking and strategy and tactics. Essentially warfare, as we are at the very least at a spiritual war. So you have to be competent to some degree, and you can't go to war and be a victim at the same time. It simply does not work. Okay, so that's out the way. Now, back to overthinking, right? I was feeling a little saddened with my whole car situation, right? And it's like, well, I'm thinking about, okay, like, there's this, there's that, and I don't know if it's gonna work, but afterward, all the noise buzzing around in my head, I started to think a lot. And since I'm thinking a lot, and no longer overthinking, that means I'm thinking a lot less. And I say, okay, well, what can I do? Well, I can wait, so that's patience. I'm in a position where I have to wait. And whenever I get the number, I can do my diligence in raising funds for the number, and I can try to work out a transportation system with the beautiful people that I have around me and my family. That's what the hell I do, you know? It's like, so if I can do that successfully, why am I so worried about components that I have no business worrying about? Because those are just stress factors that are just going to stress me into infinity effectively, because I can't do anything about it. You know? So that is overthinking. That is one of the signs that you're overthinking. If you're thinking about things that you cannot change, and it's affecting your emotional chemical factory, then it's no good. You are overthinking. If you are thinking in such a fashion that it's not only hesitating your action, because some hesitation is fine, because we're instructed not to be hasty if we are to be wise, right? But if there is a certain amount of action that you need to take for the betterment of progression, but you are being forced to be stagnant against your will due to the amount of thought that is in your mind, you are overthinking. I'm trying to think of another example, because it's hard to identify when you're overthinking. Anytime you're thinking about something that in the grand scheme of things doesn't matter and it's affecting your psychological health, you are overthinking. Now, thinking deeply is asking yourself a plethora of questions and digging for answers. You know, that was another question that me and my wife, that my wife and I answered last night. We were just scrolling through just questions for conversation's sake. And one of the questions was, what example do you want to lead for your children? And my answer was to never be afraid to search for answers. And that statement is indicative of always pursue truth, which is a challenging thing to do all the time, but do it anyway. And so with that, it's like there is a lot of thought, and there's a lot of thought-provoking that you're going to encounter in seeking any sort of truth. And you'll realize if you think hard enough about something, almost everything is mysterious. So I'm not saying don't think a lot. I'm saying do not overthink. The things that you should think about are things that matter, and if they don't matter, they shouldn't affect your psychological health. You should be prudent, but you shouldn't allow your prudence to make you petrified of the future. You should be prudent and act in a way that makes you a little safer because of your wisdom and discernment, but you should not fear anything, because we know that fear is not of the Most High, and the Most High is He is the representation of all things benevolent. And so if He's all good and fear is not of Him, then fear must be evil. And what fear leads to is cowardice, which the Most High hates, of course, as well. Which is why the fearful and the unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Right? It starts with the fearful and the unbelieving. Both of those are constructs that are subsequent to fear. Right? But fear, it's very easy to start getting scared when you're overthinking. Because what do humans fear? Well, we fear the unknown. And you know what else is, what's really scary about the unknown? Is you can't change it. Because how can you change something that you don't know, or that you're not conscious of, or cognizant of? You can't. So if you're thinking about, I don't know, a post-apocalyptic world, or how the world's demise is inevitable, and how everyone you know and who you are, everything around you will eventually die, if that scares you, you're overthinking. That is a way of life. You can think deeply about it, but don't overthink it, because if you overthink it, you are allowing fear to seep in. And if it's not of the Most High, then who is it of? So be very aware of that. Do not overthink. Okay, so this is towards the conclusion of the video. The question that is associated with the self-esteem portion, ultimately concluding this two-parter series, is how do you accept the better things in life? I think this is a very good question. So I'm just going to read out the answer that I have, which is build your competence. How do you accept the better things in life? Build your competence. Self-esteem is the main cause for you not feeling worthy or trusting optimistic views and outcomes. So let's break that down. Low self-esteem makes you pessimistic intrinsically, and it makes you feel like you're not worthy of certain things. That is what low self-esteem is supposed to make you feel. And in a very neurotic way, by the way, because part of humility is understanding that you get what you don't deserve sometimes. But that humility cannot be conflated with low self-esteem. That's a big mistake. Okay, so it's hard for you to feel that way if you feel deserving. In other words, competent. Now, a star note here is this is when this gets really, really tricky. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to... being tripped up in my garments. You don't want to get too prideful. Because that's another thing about competence, right? Like I said, competence exudes confidence. And confidence is linked to pride. And with that pride, some pride is fine. There's a certain demographic of ideologues I know somewhere who believe that you should have absolutely no pride. But that's nonsensical. You can have a certain element to pride. You just can't have a certain Machiavellianism or narcissism to your pride that affects you mentally and spiritually. So when you think of someone who's extremely competent, if you guys know the shows like Suits is a very good show. It's about lawyers. It's basically the Grey's Anatomy, but lawyers, right? The main character, who happens to be my favorite character, which is so funny for those of you who know me. The main character in that show is Harvey. That is a prideful gentleman. But Harvey is prideful, why? Because he's a bloody good lawyer. And he's a very damned good salesperson. And it's hard to separate competence and authority. That's one of the paradoxes that I constantly think about these days in regards to wisdom. It's very hard to appreciate in value for the reasons of competence and authority and link that to meekness and humility. It's a very difficult thing to do in the human psyche. It's easier to understand than to play out, 100%. That's to be sure. But that's what you're going to have to obfuscate between. You know, it's like, okay, well, I'm deserving of this because I deserve this because of the competence that I exude. So, for example, if you're a salesperson, you're on 100% commission duty, then literally all of the money that you get, you deserved, right? And so if you are a bloody well good salesperson, you're going to be very, very narcissistic very quickly if you're not careful. This is the same thing, Jordan Peterson talks about this, is the Luciferian concept of high IQ, when you're born with high IQ. It's like, you need to immediately be thankful for the God-given intellect that you have, because if you don't, you're going to literally be a part of the dark triad in 100% of your social interactions. You know. But the basis for that is pride. So you have to be very careful. So this is the trick that I have for you to avoid the pride demise. The trick is to know that no one deserves anything, but the Most High is an understanding, generous giver. Meditate on that, because that's really the trick, you know, because and that leads to his joy, which was the first question, I believe, last week, right? The last question was, how do you experience the Most High's joy despite abuse? And that's another part of the question, of the answer to that question. It's like, well, you need to understand that no one is really deserving of anything, because everyone is worthy of death, effectively, because of the quantity of sin within the world that exudes from humans. So, with that being said, it's like, well, no one deserves anything truly, but the things that we do have is because of the Most High's mercy. In other words, His love. I've got to be really grateful and thankful for that, don't I? It's like, absolutely you do, you know, and you have to think about that. You have to really think about that, because when you think about that enough, it's like, the Most High's mercy it's beyond our understanding, man. It's enough to make you cry. There's a scripture in Sirach that says, I believe it's chapter 2. It says, as the Most High's mercy, so is His majesty. Right? Let me get it. It's a very important scripture, because it's so. Hang on a second. Okay. Okay. This is the book of Sirach, chapter 2, verse 17. They that fear the Most High will prepare their hearts and humble their souls in his sight. So that's confirmation. The last verse, verse 18. Saying, we will fall into the hands of the Most High and not into the hands of men. For as his majesty is, so is his mercy. And that's a heavy scripture, man, because it's like, do you know how much the Most High... Do you know the measure of his mercy? I mean, of his majesty? It's like, no, you don't. You don't. He's an eternal being who doesn't have a beginning. It's uncomprehendable. His majesty. Like, that's... His majesty is infinitely regal. His majesty has no limits. You know, you would bury yourself 10 feet deep and bow down in the presence of the Most High, if you have any sort of understanding of the complexity of his benevolence and authority. He's the Most High. And what does that make you? Well, the lowest. You know, but it says, as infinite as his majesty is, so is his mercy. So his mercy, though it has conditions, has limitless potential. So that's something to meditate on. Think about that. How infinite is his majesty? So is his mercy. It's like, we don't deserve anything. We don't, and he gives to us anyway. You know, it's like, that's so beautiful. He gave us life for the sake of love. You know, that leads to his joy. So build your competence. Be like David. David was a competent man. He was a king. He was a soldier. He was wise. You know, he killed Goliath. Be competent. Have your competence and your purpose be harvested in the Most High's field. Because if the Most High is your foundation, then you are effectively unshakable. You just are. And you need to be dogmatic about that. That needs to be the core of your dogma. You know? So, that's going to conclude this video. I know this is a long one. Ooh, 43 minutes. So, in conclusion, be thankful, be grateful, gain competence, start small, have plans, strive for those plans. Make sure the plans are reachable. Make sure the Most High wants you to get there. So harvest in his field. Plant a seed in his field and harvest the fruits of it. Be open. Be transparent. Don't rely too much on things. Don't rely too much on things more than you rely on the Most High. Pray. Fast. Be diligent. Be vigilant. Be patient. Be still. Be calm. And stay safe, stay dangerous, and be wise. Shalom.